Okay, it is 12 noon here in New York, and maybe 11 o'clock in Washington. Bob?
Well, 12 o'clock here as well.
All right. So I'm Ellie Noam, and very happy to moderate this session organized substantially by Jason Buckwhite, who you will not see, but he makes these, organizes these events. Thank you, Jason. So the topic is the coronavirus pandemic, and online education. It is part of a series that we've had. In fact, it's the fifth one on the various institutional and business implications of the pandemic on media, on investment in media, on networks, et cetera, et cetera. And so today we're dealing with online education. And next time we are dealing with 2 weeks from now with e-health, telemedicine. And this series is co-sponsored by the Columbia Institute for Teleinformation at Columbia University and by the International Media Management Academic Association, IMMAA, which is represented on this panel by Castulos Kolo, from Munich, the president of Macromedia University, who is the president, the current president of IMMAA. Now, let me just say something about the topic and then about a person to whom we are dedicating this event. Of course, everybody who's on the show is quite familiar with the calamities that have befallen us and the various changes in the educational arrangements, parents becoming home teachers willingly or less so, universities closing down, students being sent home. And so we have basically short-term problems, medium-term problems, and long-term problems. And the short-term ones are refunding students for their tuition or for their room and board type fees for their and so on. There's the problem of visas for foreign students. There are the problems of reconfiguring classrooms and how to deal with this. Those are short-term problems. And what is remarkable is that we have resolved an awful lot of them on the fly, resolutions that would have taken in the past probably years to implement have been done around the world. Remarkable. And just imagine 20 years ago, what kind of educational arrangements could we give to our students, young ones, and college and university type ones? Would have been virtually nothing. And so we are, in that sense, blessed by an alternative, and we can think about the future too. Medium term are that these educational institutions have to configure arrangements not only in the transition phase, what are we doing in September and October, and everybody's scratching their heads in uncertainty. But there's also the pesky matter of money and how these institutions will be affected. I'll just give you one example. Rutgers University, the public university of New Jersey, 71,000 students, had to spend $50 million to refund students for unused campus services such as dining, housing, parking, as a direct result of the pandemic. In addition, the university will lose $60 million from canceled surgical procedures at Rutgers Medical Center. And on top of that, Rutgers system is losing another $73 million in state appropriations for the coming year And now there is some federal money coming in, but that is basically just about $25 so $27 million. So altogether, Rutgers is taking a hit of almost $200 million, and that does not even count the reduced donations, contributions, repaid by alumni, repayment of student loans by students who are unable to do so, lower enrollments, lower international tuition payments. That's just one university I can go on to, and it's a medium-sized public university. Rutgers is, New Jersey is a medium-sized state. So that's the medium-sized impacts. And the long-term impacts, though, to my mind, are actually the most interesting ones to think about, which is that how will all this impact the university system more generally? There have been trends already in the past, we know them, but now these trends are on steroids. Okay, they've accelerated, and the new is coming rapidly. The university system, as we knew it just a few years ago, was essentially largely unchanged for 2,500 years. From the great university, great library in Alexandria, from Nineveh, it was basically a model based on a certain technology of information production and distribution. The information was scarce. It was located at certain places called libraries, central libraries. The scholars came to the information and added to it and preserved it and passed it on to the next generation. And the students came to the scholars. And that was basically the university system that we know it, but it was based on that kind of technology of distribution and scarcity of information. And that has now changed. Information is now everywhere, and it goes to the students. The students that don't have to come to the information. And so the new technology changes the underlying distribution mechanisms and therefore the institutional arrangements. Now, this will take a while to play itself out, but these changes are inevitable, particularly since the the regular tuition-based education, physical education, has become so expensive. In the United States, in the last 40 years, the tuition payments have risen twice as fast as inflation. And so they are now becoming quite expensive, which raises all kinds of social justice type issues. And the overhead of the universities has become so expensive that there will be inevitably alternative approaches, and those are the online universities or online credentialing mechanisms or just different ways in which people gain skills. And as long as employers are willing to accept those alternative credentials, and they will, then there is now a much lower priced mechanism emerging for education. Now, I'm not going to say it's superior in all cases. Certainly, the idealized educational model of the hands-on professor and the office hours and the small seminars, those high-touch type educational models are also high cost. And so in many instances, people will choose for reasons of economic necessity or convenience to have the more remote type systems. And so that is almost inevitable to happen. And now it is happening much faster with less ability of the system to adjust itself. And so those are some of the topics that we're going to discuss today. And before I introduce the first speaker, Castillos, I want to say a word about Glenn Jones, to whom we dedicate this session. Glenn Jones is and Jason, if you have a chance to put his picture on, I would appreciate that. I sent it to you a while ago. So Glenn Jones is not particularly known anymore or to most people, but he was one of the pioneers of the cable television industry in America when it didn't exist. So he was one of the pioneers of what I would call the second generation of TV, that of multi-channel TV after the broadcast generation. And he started and it became one of the largest cable companies in the United States, eventually sold to to Comcast, which is now by far the largest. And Glenn, who came from modest circumstances, started cable with borrowing $400 against his Volkswagen to purchase his first cable system in Colorado, and that led to a big company. Eventually, he sold, as I mentioned, but he was an inveterate innovator and entrepreneur, and he started, and he was considered to be what's called the poet of cable. He had wide interests. He was interested in music. In his office, he had a grand piano. He wrote poetry and published poetry, and he was interested in education. He wrote books about education, such as Make All America a School and Cyber Schools and Educational Renaissance. And he started something called Jones International University, of which I had the privilege of being on its board, as was Bob Jones, no relation, who will also speak today, as was Milton Goldberg, who was in fact the chancellor, the last chancellor of Jones International University before it was sold. Glenn also started the Learning Channel, Knowledge TV, Mind Extension University. He had his fingers in a whole range of efforts that went beyond what business types do. He was really genuinely interested in spreading education, just as he had the opportunity, spreading education around the country and the globe. Jones International University became the first accredited online university in the world. And it started in, so Glenn, in that sense, was not only a pioneer of the second generation of video and TV, but also of the third generation online. And so in that this remarkable man should be remembered. I gave you only kind of a short slice of the contributions that he has made. So he's one of the great innovators of education and of media. So without further ado, and I've spoken quite long, with your kind permission, I will kind of now recognize Kastoulis Kolo, a word of introduction. Kastoulis Kolo is a professor, Dr. Kastoulis Kolo. He has two doctorates that are quite incompatible, it seems, on first sight. He started particle physics and worked at CERN in Geneva as a particle physicist. And then he also got another PhD in social anthropology, a very kind of unusual combination. He was worked in a variety of capacities in science, in management consulting, and now he has become, after being a professor at Macromedia University, has become its president, and he might say a word or two about it. So, Kastoulis, please go ahead.
Thank you, Eli, for the kind introduction, and thanks for being with you. With my background representing a private university in Germany, which is quite unusual because most universities in Germany are public, I will try to embed my thoughts and observations in the general German as well as European context. Macromedia University is part of a larger ecosystem of universities called Galileo Global Education, which is currently the leading European private higher education provider. I will put an emphasis on higher education. Also, I will reach out also to the general situation of schools in Germany and Europe. And I will also put an emphasis in my introductory statement on the current situation, but I'm happy to discuss what the future may bring with you later on. So what can be said on the transformation of distance learning after COVID-19, given my background? First of all, what we see in Europe is unfortunately that COVID-19 is not over yet. So we are not yet in an after COVID-19 period. It's at best a pause that we have. and the reactions we see are more like driving on site than planned action with longer term anticipation of maybe well elaborated goal for after Corona times. So we are still dealing with an ad hoc kind of first aid reaction, I'd say, to an ongoing crisis. And in Germany, we have some regions, again, with rising numbers of infections. The situation in some other European countries is even more critical. So some of the hardest hit countries in Europe, like Italy, Spain, or France, are recovering fast and reopened their borders even for summer tourism. And in most European countries, actually, holidays are approaching for schools, and also universities approach the end of the summer semester, of this Corona semester, this particular semester. Now, what can be said about the European and German education sector in retrospective over these last 3 months? School campus had been closed in most countries. As you probably have heard, in the US, as part of a more general lockdown, with only Sweden as a notable exception. And in Germany, schools reopened step by step from mid-May on to a level where distancing is still possible. So it's still far away from business as usual. And apart from a few countries still keeping their schools closed, this is the general development in Europe. What concerns universities in Germany, they decided to complete the summer semester as distance learning semester for most courses. Only some courses based on practical experience are given for small groups. In Germany, in most regions, it's limited to 30 students on site. So this is pretty much what happens or happened all over Europe. When you talk to university rectors or presidents in Germany and for other European countries where I know colleagues, it's similar. The overall reaction is that they are happy with how they manage the crisis, and they are all ready to come up with particular cases they think underline their success of handling it. However, when you talk to students' representatives, the feedback is a lot more diverse. The problem with a critical reflection on the month before is that there is, at least for the time being, a striking lack of empirical evidence and detail what exactly was done while switching to online mode. So we have plenty of anecdotal evidence of great stories, how particular presidents or university rectors succeeded in handling the situation, but very little substantial and comparative evidence what actually was done. So in Germany, there are several reasons for this lack of data, and that brings me a bit to the particular system. Education is an issue controlled by the authorities of the individual countries within the European Union, and within Germany, it's the responsibility of the regional states, or Länder as we call them. So decision-making is distributed all over. If you get data, it comes in diverse formats and at different times, so hardly helpful. And I guess most universities are quite happy anyway with not having to report details, as at least some are far from being as great in coping with the situation as they think. So despite this shortage of data, I will try to summarize some observations. There is no evidence that there are fundamental technical problems. The network infrastructure seemed to be stable when universities started the summer semester online, all of them. In Germany, some even had a few weeks to prepare for it, because lockdown was announced a few weeks before opening or starting the summer term. This lead time probably prevented bandwidth problems. So overall, technical problems on the university level were the exception. Schools had to react more swiftly, but even their network problems are rarely reported, apart from let's say, the last mile, the household level, where the whole family streamed videos in parallel. So technically, there was kind of a preparedness that can be observed. For higher education, access devices like laptops or tablets with cameras also were a minor problem. But, and this was astonishing, I think, also for policy in Germany, for school children, a digital divide became apparent all of a sudden that was largely overlooked before Corona. So people realized that, oops, a smartphone may be not enough to interact for a school child in primary or secondary education to interact. So this is something that became obvious only within the situation, and it's still not dealt with appropriately, in my opinion. But what is even more critical is that the specific modes in how online education was delivered varied enormously. This is where different approaches across universities became obvious and show extremely different levels in how online education actually was implemented. And here the approaches, they range. Can you still hear me? There's a signal that there are network problems. So
No, we can see you fine, Casillas.
Okay, good. So what we see is that when professors or school teachers talk about online education, they talk about many different things. The approaches range from sending emails with scanned worksheets, lengthy videos spanning lectures of an hour or more but to also more advanced formats like videos coming in palatable content nuggets, live sessions on streaming platforms, and interactive quizzes or peer-to-peer feedback. So also exams proved to be a serious issue. Very few universities make use of proctoring methods or dare open book online exams. So it's far from certain that all courses of the still ongoing summer term can be completed with exams, which is a problem for the students who want to go on. Most universities left the decision of what actually is provided in a specific course to the individual professor. And this accounts for public universities and schools alike, where teaching staff mostly has the status of a state functionary in Germany. So private higher education providers could react more encompassingly and with plucky collective action than these public organizations, which had difficulties when it came to quick decision-making, large-scale transformation, and organizational learning. However, in Germany, only 10% of all students in higher education are studying in private universities and paying fees. Public universities are free of charge. There's a symbolic fee, I'd say, that has nothing to do with what you are used to in the US. So private education amounts to only 10%, which is even low for European standards. In France or Italy, the level is at about 20%. Private universities are a lot more innovative also when it comes to pure distance learning in pre-corona times. However, here also Germany is quite, I would say, behind what you know in the US. We have only about 7% pre-corona pure distance learning students, of which, however, 45% are private. So distance learning, pure distance learning, is very much a private university issue, a private higher education issue in Germany. Overall, the COVID-19 crisis, I'd say, challenges also the general readiness of national education systems for post-COVID change based on learnings made during the crisis. All the more as universities should be prepared for changes required by other pressing trends in education, having in principle nothing to do with COVID-19, but most probably being augmented by it. And we may have time to talk about that later on. So the current situation also questions whether COVID-19 will be taken as an opportunity for driving change, or rather as a challenge to be overcome to get back to the previous situation as soon as possible. I think universities should grasp this opportunity to differentiate themselves in education, and education policies should provide framework conditions that support the momentum in this digital transformation of education. Competition on the institutional level and incentives on the lecturer or teacher level, which are still largely absent in public education, but also promotion of best practices may help here to move forward and keep the current momentum. Unfortunately, as little data as we have on the current situation in higher education, we also cannot really know what will happen in fall. So far, there is not really an incentive for public universities nor for public schools to move towards more digital in teaching formats. And furthermore, the lack of empirical evidence impedes a joint learning curve. Also, trainings to learn from the current experience and to reflect on pros and cons of digital education were largely missed, I'd say. For private universities, this is an interesting situation. They still grow in students' numbers, unlike public universities, and even see now increasing demand by domestic students. International students are a challenge. But rather than just simulating pure distance learning programs, I expect a more substantial move towards blended and hybrid modes. So the task then will be here to provide a seamless study experience with a more individual provision of education.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes?
Mr. Lewis, we have to move on, so if you can come to the...
Just one last sentence, yeah? So there's still some way to go that online teaching is understood as providing additional means for didactics that allow for a more individual learning trajectory and prepare for a future workplace. It could specifically also support disadvantaged students, which should be considered also when talking about the future of distance learning. Thank you. This is the European and German perspective.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Castulos. We ran a bit over. Luckily, I was kind of frozen out for a while, and I had to spend several minutes getting back. So you had several extra minutes. But I do hope, Bob and Milton, that we stay on course so that we can end at 1 o'clock our time. I'd like to recognize now Bob Jones as the next panelist. Just a few words about Bob. First, we met when he and I were serving on Glenn Jones's board of Jones International University. Bob, who, as I mentioned, is, while his last name is Jones too, is no relation, was for two different presidents in two different periods, the Assistant Secretary of Education in Washington. He has also been the President of Education and Workshop Policy, a policy consulting firm in Washington to advance education training and workforce policy. He has served as President and CEO of the National Alliance of Business, and he has played a lead role in a landmark research project called Workforce 2000, Work and Workers for the 21st Century. He has been on numerous boards of higher and general education, and we are extremely pleased to have him. He was awarded, just to give you a sense of the respect he is being held, he was awarded the Presidential Distinguished Executive Award, which is the highest honor in the federal government. And very few people get that Presidential Distinguished Executive Award. So, Bob, please go ahead.
Thank you, Eli. And we are honored to be a part of Can you hear me? Did I unmute?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, thank you. And I'm honored to be a part of honoring Glenn Jones and a discussion that's affecting all of us in Europe and here and across the world. Let me just summarize quickly by saying, I think it's important to understand a lot of schools in this country at all levels, higher education, community college, K through 12, had some foot in distance learning. But most of that was all based on the traditional models of education, as you pointed out earlier, that we've had for the past thousands of years. In effect, they were taken by great surprise, had to move very quickly to put in short-term online programs for the end of the session and now for the beginning of the next session. It's not at all clear that there are any standardizations, that there are any clarity of outcomes, that there's any ability to distinguish between students that achieved and students that have not achieved. What's most important of all, this is all taking place at a time in the United States when there are some very specific issues that will impact the future of distance education. The first one I would point out is quite obvious. The workplace is changing dramatically at a very rapid rate. It demands that schools, educators, states work closely with business, and it causes them to have to begin to align curriculum, content, and outcomes on a continuous basis. Never happened before, and most institutions aren't prepared for that. Second, because of that changing workplace, there's a growing concern in the Congress, in the Department of Education, every place, governors across the country, that we are not measuring student outcomes to the degree that the marketplace demands. We have programs, we have institutions, but we're not measuring curriculum, standards, outcomes, and ensuring that students, in fact, are reaching that standard and communicating it to the outside world. And that brings us to perhaps the biggest issue of all, which is affecting both Europe and the United States. Majority of students today, at all age levels, 62%, are looking for shorter term programs, what we now call micro-credentials. 4, 5, 6-year universities are now in question. We want credentials that will empower us in the workplace. Schools at every level are now, in addition to their traditional academics, having to put in place new programs that are shorter term but have focus on specific skill sets and result in a credential of some sort, whether it's a certificate or a license or a badge or whatever it might be. And that those things are in great demand, and schools are struggling to put those in place, and those that in fact will be recognized in the process of going through this. All those challenges are going to take place immediately in the next weeks, months, year. The enormous change that's going to have to take place, and the ability to communicate that is becoming a major issue. That leads me to the question of government regulation. We have, for the entire history of our system, depended upon accreditation as a measure of quality of universities. Now, in the midst of this crisis, we are going to have to back off the accreditation standards, give people more room to adapt to the change, be more patient with what they're doing. And in the future, the entire issue of accreditation is going to have to focus more on those 3 issues I just pointed out: content of student quality, standards, curriculum, measurement, outcome, knowing that it's changing all the time. The ability to put in micro certifications that in fact have quality standards with them and outcome standards with them, and the ability to maintain constant relations with the business community that's changing. The accreditation world, which I've been a part of for quite some time, is now struggling to make these changes and make them soon as we move ahead. Lastly, I would point out there's the issue that was just brought up of equity throughout the entire system. Not only equity in schools and funding, but equity for students, both financially in this country, but also from technology. We find from K through 12 through university levels, two major issues. One, our technology systems, our internet systems, are highly variable and highly variable in various communities. So even on Zoom calls like this, sometimes some people struggle to make it work. But in the school system and distant learning, some have access and some do not. And those technology systems are going to be challenged to upgrade rapidly. And the second part of that is the public access for students of disadvantaged nature. It was terrible in finding out that several of our states, including my state of Virginia, had a law that said if students didn't have computer technology, the school system could not pay for it. So we had distinct disadvantages of students having access to systems and having equipment to maintain the systems, let alone being prepared for that kind of learning. That set of challenges faces us immediately and greatly as we move ahead. Thank you very much.
Bob, that was kind of really, really interesting and a real nice update on what we're looking forward to in Washington. Our final speaker is Milton Goldberg. Milton had also the association with Glenn Jones by being first the chairman of the board for Jones International University, but also then became the chancellor of that university. And kind of guided it through kind of very complicated period. So it's really nice to link up with you again, Milton. Milton actually started out as a teacher and administrator in the Philadelphia public school system, and then kind of studied more education and became a teacher, academic-wise, and also had leadership positions in the Department of Education in Washington. He was the executive director of the National Commission on Excellence in Education, which issued a landmark report, A Nation at Risk, very, very famous at the time, generally credited with starting the nationwide education reform movement. He was the executive director for that report, which probably means he wrote most of it. And then subsequently he served as executive director in a variety for various educational reform commissions and organizations, such as a report Prisoners of Time, which explored ways to improve student learning in and out of school. He's done many other things, and he's been on many boards and commissions, and so we're very pleased to hear him and see him here online. Please go ahead, Milton.
Thank you, Ellie. It's a pleasure to be with you and Bob Jones and our colleagues. I taught my first public school class a little less than 70 years ago. 7 decades ago, I discovered my first mimeograph machine. And today we're talking about online learning. Education has come a long way since then, but it's still largely dependent on where children live and the resources their families and communities have or don't have. I'm optimistic about the future of American education because of the spread of online education. The COVID-19 pandemic has tested the resilience, flexibility, creativity, and collaboration of faculty and students throughout education. Education institutions have had to change their delivery systems. There was no warning and scant time to prepare. But the online education has been crucial to helping us adapt to this new environment. I'm impressed by the collective ability of the system to pivot to remote learning. There are examples of rough starts, outright failures, and some dissatisfaction. But aside from difficulties, students across the nation report advantages. These include fewer distractions, working at their own pace, getting more sleep. Teachers notice that children who wouldn't put a hand up in class are now emailing their questions to the teacher. Although many students also say the workload is overwhelming and completing assignments is a challenge, I see a bright future for online learning. I think it will expand even further in higher education. I think the future is bright for children and teachers and parents in education. Let me quote Sean Morris, who is director of the Digital Pedagogy Lab at the University of Colorado, says, "If there's anything I hope emerges in the new normal of higher education after this crisis passes, it would be a clearer, more widespread awareness that we must commit time, resources, and scholarship to digital pedagogy." I think one of the reasons I left the classroom and then eventually taught online was because I needed to find more and better ways to connect with students. In the classroom, there were always students I didn't really get to know, students who fell between the cracks. Online learning helped me personally change that. Let me respond to some of the specific questions you raised, Ellie, for the conference about the COVID-19 outbreak. It's challenged the higher education business model, true. Online campus education is expensive. Some people can never afford it, even with financial aid. But the fact of the matter is, it ought to be possible that online learning, reaching more students at a lower price, will make it possible for institutions of higher education to rethink their business structure in the short term and beyond. It doesn't have to be the case that online learning is better or not than regular or face-to-face education. It can be better and better. Maybe some students will experience both. A freshman online while holding a job can serve a paid internship, a sophomore year in residence, online courses during junior year abroad, or a work-study program. To advance online learning, schools and higher education have to explore the best models already in use. They have to experiment, collaborate, involve students. Technology providers must be up to the task. Internet access and connectivity should be easy and reliable. Data storage must be scalable. Security have to be high. It's interesting that in April, the Department of Education released distance learning and innovation regulations. They said that their rules clarify what counts as a substantive interaction between students and faculty in an online learning setting. Instructors must provide at least two forms of interaction, such as leading group discussion or feedback and assignments. The clarification removes confusion over whether a course is eligible for federal aid. The rules also allow students enrolled in the Higher Education Act eligible at foreign institutions to complete up to 25% of their programs at an eligible institution in the United States, all via online learning. School districts and higher educations have changed their policies on grading for the period. The department has granted waivers of federal testing requirements at all 50 states and the Bureau and the District of Columbia and DC, Puerto Rico, in order to assure the availability of online learning. The digital divide is a combination of lack of access and lack of availability. In 2019, 20% of K-12 students nationwide did not have access to a reliable internet connection. College students who left campus in March are dependent on whatever connectivity and technology are available at home, wherever they relocate. Up to 70% of college faculty have never taught an online course. These are just the issues.
Milton, 2 more minutes, please, so that we have some discussion time.
One estimate states when a large college campus moved to online learning, instead of hundreds of administrative users on their video, I'm finishing now, there were potentially tens of thousands of students. This kind of expansion will require more storage, more computer resources, and more licenses. The fact is, the future is enormous, but the problems are many.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Milton. I would like now to perhaps start prime the pump here in the discussion by asking the first question. If the logic of distance education is to reduce cost, as some of the speakers have intimated, that still often we think about it as still an instructor here and students there in real time, synchronous. But once you get into asynchronous education, you're basically talking about pre-recorded lectures that are given not just to dozens of students, but not just to hundreds of students, but to thousands of them in that Coursera model, et cetera. So if that's the case, would that not really squeeze out many of the universities in the future as being unnecessary and too long, as Bob suggested? Wouldn't that kind of then lead to an unequal system in which poor students are taught by machines and rich students are taught by people? So would you like to comment on that? Anybody?
Well, I think I say I don't worry about that problem. I believe that we ought to be constantly in the business of trying to improve the educational opportunities for students, and if that means the reduction in one form of teaching versus another, so be it. As long as the focus is on the improvement of teaching and learning, and if that means more online education and less in-person education, so be it.
All right. Bob, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry.
Unmute yourself, Bob. We cannot hear you.
Hello?
We hear you. Okay.
I would just add that it's not, this is an evolution of the model. It's not an end of a model. It's the evolution. And the issue is content. It's how we deal with the content. There's a very distinct difference between a professor standing up teaching an English class that's been going on for hundreds of years and beginning to do an online, not just presentation, but engagement that involves student involvement at a much higher level, but also with an outcomes and measurements and standards much more acclimated to tomorrow's world. There's a word that we use. We are preparing students to be adaptable to the new changing world, and the system has to be adaptable as well.
All right. Thank you very much.
Let me add one thing. I think one of the issues that will emerge now is the funding of connectivity and what roles state governments and the federal government should play in making it possible for more and more students to communicate with one another and with faculty across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned this in one of our earlier seminars. If local governments and state governments are willing to pay for school buses to bring students to the school, why shouldn't they also support broadband connectivities to do the same process? In fact, it would probably cost even less.
Exactly.
Let me kind of recognize Ben Compain with a comment or a question.
Okay. You see me? You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have a couple comments. Just this morning, I turned in my grades for my first asynchronous MBA class. But for the last 12 years, I've been teaching the course. This course was synchronous the first time. For 12 years, I've been teaching an asynchronous class. And my thoughts are, and my very first online course I taught at Temple University in 1996 with very much primitive tools compared to now. So I've had actually decades of experience online. So first, what I see today, and I think Milton and Bob are sort of getting to this, is that there's lots of experiments. We've got 100 flowers blooming, and the control group might be the legacy system, and we're going to see lots of different ways of doing this, and we'll find, we're accelerating things. As Ellie introduced in the beginning, we're accelerating this greatly. I also think that we mix up, and Ellie's just started talking about synchronous and asynchronous. They're very different animals, I think. That to me, like water skiing and downhill skiing, both are called skiing, but they're very different skills. Asynchronous, Ellie, doesn't have to be Coursera. My asynchronous course at Northeastern has 20 students per section with an instructor for each section who interacts with them on a weekly basis and grades their papers and their submissions and the discussion questions. So it doesn't have to be that asynchronous, doesn't have to be the massive thing. So they're both online, but they're different animals. And finally, I just want to say that I really think that there's going to be no going back. At Northeastern, where I teach, they're going to have something called NU Flex starting in the fall. They're outfitting every classroom with microphones hanging down, cameras in the back, a swiveling voice-activated camera that can focus on whoever in the classroom is speaking, and students will be able to work at home, work in their dormitory, or come to the classroom. And they can choose each week so that we can spread out the students in the classroom. And given that investment, and I suspect there's going to be no going back to just the traditional university. I think that the L High situation, teaching third grade online is very different than teaching a graduate school. And I think like water skiing and downhill skiing, those are going to be two very different systems.
Thank you very much. Kestis, would you like to respond to any of the comments made so far?
Yes. Two things are interesting and appear different from a European perspective. The discussion seems to be very much either pure distance education or on-site education. In Europe, what we see is more a trend towards hybrid or blended models, with still a lot of emphasis on the social experience as a student. And I think this is where some emphasis should be put on to come up with seamless solutions, combining digital experience and on-site education. Also to allow for individual learning experience. That's one observation. And the other one is the German system, which is mainly state-funded, seems to be quite resilient in a situation where in the US fees do not come in anymore from foreign students, international students. on the other hand, what we see is that it is basically or predominantly state-funded university system in Germany is very slow in adapting to change. There is not really a reason to change education and to change teaching. So what we observe is very much a tendency to wait for just going back to pre-COVID teaching modes whenever the situation will be over. So the opportunity may be missed to take this momentum and propel education forward as it is required by the future workplace, as my co-presenters mentioned. So this discussion seems to be slightly different in the US, and also the responses.
Thank you very much. Is there any question from the audience? There's a feature kind of raising your hand, but some of you might not have done so. So if you want to just jump in, please go ahead. Is there anybody who has a comment? Some of you are also on the phone. I hear nobody. So let me ask you a question in terms of, Bob was talking about the credentialing, and that's one way, on the one hand, to somewhat reduce competition, I suppose, academic as well as economic. But another function is also to have a floor, at least, on standards and on quality. Is that going to go by the boards? That is to say, are we witnessing a kind of dumbing down of the educational system because standards are harder to enforce? What do you think, Bob?
No, I think it's, again, just the opposite. I think this is what's being called for now is a much clearer expression of curriculum, the content, the standards expected, the measurement, and the ability to ensure that all students are coming to the standard. These new methods of online learning offer an opportunity for not just teaching to 30 students, and some get it and some don't, but in fact, to follow up with students with tutorials and things, to bring them to standard to adapt and survive in a very rapidly changing world. Those standards are going to have to be clearer, higher, and enforceable.
I mean, to what Bob just said, that one of the issues is going to be how to make sure that all teachers are up to the task of providing good online education. And that it's clearly not the case that all teachers are in the same place when it comes to the utilization of the technology. So we need systems in place, probably governmentally developed, that ensure teacher education in online education.
Mm-hmm.
Castellus, I see you're nodding. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I would agree. What I observe, it's not so much a question of technology. It's rather preparedness of teachers and professors for this new world of online education. We have a lack of dedicated or specific didactics that really makes use of these new means of teaching. So the technology alone doesn't help. And this is something that is lagging behind, I'd say, in Europe. And I also wanted to confirm what I think Bob was it who mentioned it. Online education is a lot more transparent when it comes to teaching material, to competences, and it allows for the observation of an individual learning trajectory of the individual performance. And it's much more transparent also in grading and evaluating individual students' progress. So it's fairer, it's fact-based, and this will overall, at least mid-term, maybe not short-term, improve quality.
Thank you very much. Let me now, since our time is up, before thanking the speakers in the audience, to say I think what we're witnessing here is an enormous shock to the system. And we start out by just wanting everybody to be safe, but in the hierarchy of needs, pretty soon we're getting to these other requirements and needs that we have to fulfill. And in some ways, the entire discussion is now being compressed enormously. So there's more need than ever to think it through, to analyze and to act, and to analyze how the action have proceeded. So I think there's an enormous period of creativity here for people in education, in communications, in media, and technology. And we might be witnessing possibly one of the most creative periods in hundreds or even thousands of years when it comes to the educational model. I'm not quite sure if we're prepared for it, and there's a lot of politics and politicization, and people are foaming at the mouth about all kinds of things from the left, from the right. But it is now time for everybody here who listened to this discussion and the previous discussions to think creatively and to contribute to this debate. So I do thank you very much, the speakers, Bob, Milton, and Kastoulis, who participated here, and you of the audience. I see that there were several other questions in the background. I apologize that we ran out of time. I did not see that you were asking a question, Paulo, for example. My apologies. Thank you very much, audience. Thank you very much, speakers. And thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.